A system is a group of parts that work together to behave as a whole. You can think of the human body as a system. You have systems within a system. You've got your nervous system, your endocrine system, your reproductive system. Without one of those, the human body would not work. So they work together to create one larger system. We can think of the Earth as a system or as a living being as well. In the 70s, James Lovelock was a British chemist, came up with the idea of the Gaia hypothesis. Gaia was the Greek goddess of the earth, but it's the idea that the earth is like a single biological being, kind of like a human, that's made up of individual and interconnected units. In this diagram, you can see how some of these various Earth systems work together. We have our atmosphere, oceans, our land, or geosphere. We have inputs and outputs to each of these systems. We have energy that is an input and energy as an output. We've got matter that cycles within the system. So this is one way to look at the Earth as one being. When we look at the Earth as a system, we are also looking at non-living or abiotic parts in addition to the living parts. And as with all systems, we're going to have inputs and outputs and processing of those inputs within the system. So most systems are going to follow this general pattern: an input, a process, and an output. Let's use photosynthesis as an example because it's the starting point of all food chains on Earth. We have inputs, which are solar energy, water, carbon dioxide. So that's input into the system, and then within the plant, the light energy is trapped. We have a chemical reaction, so that's the processing, and then we have our output, oxygen, we have carbon dioxide, and then glucose is when the solar energy is converted into chemical energy. Now, photosynthesis we can also look at as systems within a system. For example, if we look at this food chain, you have solar energy that enters the plant converts that energy into glucose, the zebra eats the plant, the lion eats the zebra, and the energy is passed through the chain. Now, if you were to take any single one of these systems, like if we think of the zebra as a system, and remove him, then this entire food chain would fall apart. So the important thing to remember is that it's the components that make up the system. Each individual component doesn't work by itself. It's the interactions with each other. There are several types of systems. One is an open system where matter and energy is exchanged. So you're going to have matter and energy as an input and matter and energy as an output. Can you think of examples of an open system? Most systems are going to be open. For example, an ecosystem, you have energy as input, you have matter as input. These arrows represent the flows, and both matter and energy is an output as well. So matter, we have biogeochemical cycles. Some of the cycles that we'll look at this year, we have nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, carbon, and we'll look at how that matter cycles through. Energy, plants fix energy from the light, so our solar energy is our input, and they pass along that energy in the form of glucose, and then heat is also passed along and lost by the ecosystem. So that would be another example of an output. A closed system exchanges energy but not matter, so energy becomes our input and output. Now, it's harder to think of an example of a closed system because there aren't very many. They're extremely rare. We can think of the Earth itself as a closed system. We have light energy from the sun, and that radiation is re-radiated as long wave or infrared heat that's returned to space. Occasionally we will have matter if we take into account getting hit by an asteroid, but for the most part, Earth is a closed system. Now, on Earth, there are no natural closed systems. We have tried to recreate a closed system. This is a picture of Biosphere 2, which was our attempt at creating a closed system on Earth. It was built at the end of the 80s in Arizona, where there's plenty of sunlight. And the idea behind this was if we can get this to work on Earth, then that would lead us to the ability to experience space colonization. The problem is we've never been successful with a biosphere on Earth. We can't produce enough food for those that live inside, and also we've had problems with the oxygen levels, and they've needed to be augmented. Now, if we're on another planet and the atmosphere is different, that wouldn't be possible. The third type of system is an isolated system, so it exchanges neither matter nor energy, so you have no inputs or no outputs. Isolated systems do not exist. The only example we could come up with would be to think of the universe itself as an isolated system. Now, systems are generally complex. When we study the inputs and what the response is, a lot of times there's a time delay. So a lot of times it's too late to take corrective action. One example would be when a smoker quits smoking but already has lung cancer. Because a lot of times you might quit smoking and be cancer-free, but years later the cancer develops. So the response has been delayed. Now, another example of what makes systems complex is their interactions with each other. A synergistic reaction is when two or more processes interact, so their combined effect is greater than their sum of their separate effects. So what this means, a lot of times doctors will prescribe two medications because each medication taken by itself has no effect, but those two medications might have a chemical reaction in your body that has the desired effect. So what it does is amplifies what we call positive feedback, and we'll talk about in the next video what positive feedback is. Another example to think about is two people lifting a heavy object. If one person tries to lift something that's heavy and it doesn't move, the other person tries to lift it by themselves, it doesn't move, but those two people work together and become components of the system, they can lift the object.